So we're starting a brand new series this week called Culture of Serving. And remember, we've been in this year-long theme about what the culture of the church should look like. And again, one of the things that should define the culture in the church should be this attitude of serving. And today I want to start this message off, and this message will go for 5 weeks, so it'll take up the whole month of September. And I wanted to start off today by talking about Jesus is our example. Now, of course, Jesus is our example for everything, but especially when it comes to this thing called serving. Jesus is our ultimate example, and that's what I want to talk about today. But before I get into that, I just want to say that this whole thing about serving, this series, what we're going to be talking about is very personal to me. Now, all these messages really are personal, I think, to me and to all of us, but especially this thing called serving, because when I got saved in 1996 in a church in Suffolk, Virginia, some of you may know where that's at, and I'll tell you what, I don't miss hurricanes living in Virginia. They're not fun. So anyway, when I got saved, I started going to this church in Suffolk, Virginia called Open Door Church. And the pastor's there, his name was Pastor Tony Peaks. He's still pastoring there, him and his wife, Pastor Kathy. They've been pastoring that church, I think, for almost 40 years. And they raised me as a Christian. They got me as a 20-year-old that didn't know nothing, didn't know the Bible, and didn't know nothing about Christianity, serving God. And they discipled me, they mentored me, they showed me the ropes. And Pastor Tony really built his whole ministry on this idea of serving. He would always say, I don't care how talented you are, how gifted you are. He says, I need people who are willing to serve, because that's what Jesus set as the ultimate example of serving. And so they taught me how to serve. And so before I ever preached or ever did anything up front, I did the toddler nursery. I'm going to tell you, I did whatever they needed done. I was the janitor, okay? I cleaned the toilets. Exactly, it's yucky. So I go in one Sunday morning, and now I'm not going to tell you over my years of being a janitor at the church whose bathroom was consistently dirtiest, the women's or the men's. Because I'm telling you, it surprised me that I won't even go into that. But anyway, I go into the men's room one Sunday morning, and there's literally a mess on the floor. I mean, a mess, okay? I don't want to get too graphic. Some of you just ate. You might be eating right now. And so I'm cleaning up the mess. I think it was before a Sunday morning service, and one of the elders walks in, and he sees me cleaning this mess up, and he says, welcome to the ministry, brother. But I mean, I cleaned the church, I taught the kids, I did toddler nursery. There's probably not a ministry in the church I haven't done. I've been a greeter, I've been an usher, I was on the worship team, I led outreach, I did everything. But the whole thing was they taught me how to serve. And I believe that this serving is so important in the church. And so we're going to look at Jesus as the example for serving. But you know what? What is really at the heart of being a servant? Is it just to do the menial tasks that nobody else wants to do? You know, to just clean or do things? Well, nobody else wants to do those jobs, so somebody's got to do it. Or is there something more to it? And I believe the answer to this question is found in Paul's letter to the Philippian church. And so the scripture that I'm going to use today is Philippians chapter 2, and we're going to read verses 3 through 8, but I'm going to start with just verses 3 through 5 and work on that, and then we'll get to the next set. So Paul writes in Philippians 2, 3 through 5, he says, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble. Thinking of others is better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interest, but take an interest in others too. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. I'll tell you what, I could probably just do a whole message on the first 3 words. Don't be selfish. I want to tell you, I believe with all my heart, we're all born with this problem of being selfish and self-centered. We all are. We're afflicted with this disease called sin, where we're like born hardwired to want to do it our way and not God's way. It's because it goes all the way back to Genesis and the Garden of Eden and the fall of man and the separation between God and man, and everyone born after that point is born separated from the life of God. We don't know God. We're spiritually dead. And so there's just a part of us. Now I want you to think about the word sin. What is in the middle of the word sin? You got S and N on one side. What's in the middle? Right? Me. Selfishness. Now just all you got to do, if you've got little kids, go do the toddler nursery. I learned that early on in church when I was keeping the toddler. You see the sinful nature at its best. Kids don't need to be taught this. It's like we come by it naturally. You took my toy. That's my juice, even if it's not my juice. Like our 2-year-old man, he will take he'll drink his juice, and then he'll grab his sister's juice and drink hers too. I'm thinking, well, there's the sinful nature for you right there. We just come by it naturally. Think about it as infants. I mean, life revolves around us, right? I'm hungry, feed me. I made a mess in myself, change my diaper. You know, I need to burp me. I feel alone, pick me up, hold me, cuddle me, do something, sing to me, put me to sleep, rock me. It's all about us. We are born just hardwired to kind of be self-centered, selfish. It's really all about us. And then, you know, we grow up, and if we're not taught better, we just kind of carry that into adulthood. That somewhere in our brains, we think the whole universe revolves around me, revolves around us, right? And we think, well, I'm the captain of my universe here. I'm the captain of this boat. It's my life. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. I'm the boss. I call the shots. And that's what God has to deal with when it comes to this thing called serving. Because the heart of serving really strikes at that selfish nature that we're all struggling to deal with. Because it causes us to not just be self-centered or focused on us or our own needs and interests, but it causes us to put the focus on other people and other people's needs and to humble ourselves and to lower ourselves. But that's not easy. Now, he said there at the end, he says, okay, we've got to have the same attitude that Jesus Christ had. And Jesus modeled the attitude Paul's talking about, humbling yourself, putting others' needs above your own, and seeking the interest of others and not just yourself. And so that the second part of this verse I want to read, verses 6 through 8, talks about the attitude that Jesus had, this attitude of serving, this heart of serving. So verses 6 through 8 says this. It says, though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. And what I want to say from these verses is really how Jesus models this heart of serving and the mentality of serving in all areas of his life, his birth, his life, and his death. So we start with the birth of Jesus. And as Paul said, you know, the great thing about Christianity is that God became a human being. God took on human flesh. Now, how many of you guys have been doing the Bible reading? Reading through the Gospel of John, okay? Today's day 7, so we're reading through chapter 7. But you remember in the beginning, in chapter 1, John starts his gospel right off. He says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then later on in that chapter, he says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So he establishes right from the get-go, Jesus wasn't just some good man, wasn't just some prophet or nice teacher, but he was literally God in the flesh. He didn't come into existence when he was born on Christmas morning. He existed before he became a human. He existed with God throughout eternity as the Son, as the Word of God. So when he took on human flesh, think about the way that God chose to enter the world. Okay, how many heard that expression and probably said it to your kids 1,000? Were you born in a barn? Right? Well, Jesus was literally born in a barn. Come on, you could say that about Jesus. He was born in a stable, in a manger, a place where they kept animals because there was no room for him to be born in an inn. Now, I want you to think about the pomp and the circumstances that surround world leaders. Now, I don't care who you voted for. This is not a political discussion, but I'm just talking about if the president comes to town, does he just walk in just kind of by himself? No, come on, man. There's security. They're going to play dun, 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 or whatever that song is. Come on, if the Queen of England comes to the United States, if the Pope comes to the United States, if some world leader, when world leaders walk about the world, man, there's just a big show, right? Because we got to honor that position. This is awesome. But when God himself, the one who created everything, the one who created the universe, when he came into this world as a human being, how did he show up? I mean, if it weren't for a few ragtag shepherds and some wise men from the east, nobody would have known about this birth. The guy was born in a barn. Come on. Just think about the humility. Paul says he gave up his divine privilege. He was God, but yet when he was born, he came so humble, so lowly. If anybody could have come and just, God could have showed up in the flesh, you would think if anybody could just walk around the streets and say, I'm the Son of God, and shoot lightning bolts out of his fingers. I'm thinking like Thor. If you're a Marvel Avengers guy, you like Thor. Come on. He'd be like that. He'd have his big hammer and stuff and shooting lightning bolts. But no, he's born in a manger. Nobody even really knows who he is. If Jesus were born today, there would be no CNN. Breaking news, the Son of God was born today in Bethlehem. There would be no coverage. Fox News wouldn't be there. Nobody would be there. Except a few angels and some shepherds and some wise men from the east, and of course his parents. That's how the lowly way the Son of God chose to come into the earth. Right from the get-go, he's saying, look, I'm not here to show off who I am. I'm here to make a difference in other people's lives. I'm not here to toot my own horn and say, hey, look at me, I'm the Son of God. Jesus even said this. He said, the Son of Man didn't come to be served. He said, I came to serve. I came to give my life for others. Well, so he showed even in his birth this humility, this lowering himself. Now, what about his life? Now look, when you read through the Gospels, you don't get a big picture of Jesus' life. You see him born, and then you see him basically show up when he's 30 and he starts his public ministry. Outside of one little account Luke gives us when he was 12 and he scares the bejesus out of his parents and gets lost in the temple. But other than that, we don't know much about his daily life other than nothing really stood out. He was the son of a carpenter, which means he was probably a carpenter himself. So you're thinking, Jesus, nice guy, built my kitchen cabinets, made a table for me. Nothing spectacular about him. I mean, he was a nice guy, a little weird. He was always off in the woods and praying to himself and talking to himself. But, nothing stood out about this guy. There were no miracles that he did until he starts his public ministry. But when you look at the life of Jesus Christ, he came into this world as a servant. Paul said he humbled himself as a human being to obedience. He said he took on the form of a servant. That word there is slave. He took on the form. Now, who is he a slave to? He was a slave to do the will of his Father. And it wasn't like misery for him. It was his pleasure, it was his joy to do the will of his Father. Read the Gospels. As we go through John, you will see Jesus say, I only say what my Father tells me to say. I only do what my Father tells me to do. I'm not doing this for myself. I'm not doing this to toot my own horn. I'm doing this because this is what my Father wants me to do. He lived his life in service to do the will of God, the will of his Father. Now, even though he was equal with God, Paul said that. The Son was equal with God, but in his humility, he lowered himself to be obedient to his Father. That means when his Father told him to do this, Jesus did it. If his Father told him to do that, Jesus did it. So he took on this form of a servant. And not only that, but as he put his Father's will above his own, he put other people above his own interest. We're starting John 7 today. So if you've already read John chapters 1 through 6, you've already seen Jesus laying down his own needs to meet the needs of others, right? How about the woman at the well? I think that was chapter 4. He's journeying from Jerusalem up to Galilee. That's a long walk, okay? They don't have cars, they don't have buses, they don't have planes. It's a walk. And so he's exhausted. He's sitting by this well. He's thirsty. He's weary. He's tired from the journey. But yet he takes the time out to minister to this woman whose life is an absolute wreck. But and the disciples, they're out getting lunch. They come back and they're like, what are you doing? It's lunchtime, man. We got to eat. Come on, your blood sugar is getting a little low, Jesus. We got to eat. And he's like, whoa. He tells them, I got food you don't know nothing about. I got something that drives me and fuels me that you don't understand. It's to do the will of my Father. There was a life that needed saved. There was a town that needed to hear about the salvation that he was bringing into the world. And so he sacrificed his own needs to meet the needs of others. Time and time again, all throughout the Gospels, whether you read Matthew, Mark, or Luke, or John, you see Jesus taking time out of his own life to meet other people's needs. And that's this serving. That's this taking other people's needs and making them above yourself. Now, I will say this is kind of my rabbit. Does that mean we got to become doormats for people? Does that mean we let people walk all over us and take it? No, absolutely not. And it'd take a whole message to explain this, but if you've ever read a book called Boundaries, I encourage you to read it if you haven't. It's all about establishing healthy boundaries. So again, being a servant is not about being a doormat, because if you read through Jesus' life, he wasn't a doormat. He had boundaries. In fact, in John, I think chapter 5 or 6, it said the people wanted to take him by force and make him a king. You know what Jesus did? He headed out to the hills, said, bye. You're not going to dictate what I'm going to do with my life. And he took off and prayed. So, again, I just want to throw that out there. Being a servant doesn't mean we're doormats and we let people abuse us and do whatever they want. No, we got to have healthy boundaries. But we need to learn to put other people's needs above our own. Now, not only in his birth, not only in his life, but also in his death, Jesus showed the form of a servant. So when you look before he goes to the cross, he goes into the Garden of Gethsemane, and he prays that he doesn't want to go to the cross, okay? He is God, but yes, he's human. He doesn't want to die. And he says to his Father, if there's any way I can get out of this, please, let's do it. But then he says, nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. So he humbles himself even to obedience to death. Now look, it's one thing to die. You would think, again, the Son of God, the way he should go out, some grand, heroic, honorable death, right? And just, I don't know, I'm trying to think of, go back to Endgame. I hope I'm not spoiling if you haven't seen it, if you're a Marvel. Okay, Iron Man sacrificed himself to save everybody, right? Okay, this grand, honorable, glorious death, and this is not how Jesus dies. Jesus dies on a cross. Jesus dies the death of a common criminal. He is mutilated, he is tortured, he is beaten, he is mocked, he is laughed at, he is spit on, he is stripped naked, he's humiliated in front of everybody. And he's nailed to a cross between two thieves. Wow. That's no honorable death of some great martyr, some great person we would point to like on a battlefield or something. He's dying the death of a common criminal. But all of that shows that he was a servant. Just like Paul said, he left everything. Jesus said himself, he could have called down angels and wiped out all of them and gotten off of that cross. But he didn't do it. So in his birth, he humbled himself, took on human form, lowly human form. In his life, he submitted himself to do the will of God. And even in his death, he humbled himself. It was his Father's will for him to die for us. That's what serving's all about. Jesus died for you. Everything that he did, his birth, his life, his death, he did it all for you. He did it all for me. He did it all so that we could have a salvation that we could not get on our own. That's called serving. That's called meeting someone else's need that they cannot meet for themselves when you have the means to, when you have the ability to meet it. That's what Jesus did for all of us. And so as we go through this series, I'll say the same thing to all of us that Paul, the challenge to all of us that Paul set, will we have the same attitude that Jesus Christ had? Will we, again, it's not going to come overnight, okay? Because we got that I, remember? We got that I, we're self-centered. We still have that nature that wants to put my needs above everybody else and forget about everybody else, and it's just about me, and the universe revolves around me, and we forget, oh yeah, there's about 8 billion other people on this planet, right? And so we almost have to train ourselves to think about others. There are simple things you can do to just kind of train yourself to think about others. How about opening the door for somebody? You ever go behind somebody and they open the door and they don't even bother to turn around to look to see if somebody's coming behind them, and they just let the door like slam right in your face? I mean, isn't that just a simple way to acknowledge, hey, there might be somebody coming behind me. Let me hold the door open for them. How about letting somebody go ahead of you in the line or something? Maybe you're starving, maybe they are too. Hey, go ahead of me. There are simple things we can do to kind of put others above ourselves and not always have to be about us. And so again, as we go through this series, I just challenge us to take on the same attitude that Jesus had, to put others first, to put God's will above our own will, what God wants us to do with our lives above what maybe we want to do with our lives. And it's a constant struggle. So I'm going to close in prayer, and the band will come back up. Actually, I totally forgot about communion. Strike that. We're going to do communion.